White guests laughed at the black waitress until they saw who her father was. What happens when a Chicago waitress becomes the center of a high-profile lawsuit against an elite restaurant? When the managers laughed in her face, they had no idea she was a senator's daughter who doesn't know how to stay silent. What happened next made the entire industry freeze. Sometimes life doesn't strike you with a fist. It sips martini, leans back in a monogrammed armchair, and quietly leans toward the waitress. "You're not in your place, sweetheart." And then it laughs. Not because it finds something funny, but because it understands you cannot answer. Diana Johnson knew exactly what being invisible meant. She had spent 2 years serving in Maison Elise, a restaurant that could easily double as a museum of white smugness, with waitstaff arranged like silent portraits on the walls. In all that time, she remained the only black waitress. Yes, the one with a bachelor's degree in sociology, carefully tucked away in a dresser drawer because real adults don't discuss systemic racism over foie gras. This particular evening, she approached table number 7. 3 men in suits that smelled of money and post-workout cologne, and a woman as white-creamed as creme brulee. Smooth-looking, but utterly devoid of flavor. Diana lifted a crystal water glass with the precision of a performer, placing it beside a Bordeaux goblet. Her posture was poised, professional. It was performance art in quiet form. But one lopsided huff, a bald man with a sheen of superficial polish, broke the air with a barb. "I wonder, are they now hiring by quota, or just aiming to diversify the decor?" Their laughter was not the kind that warms a room. It was corrosive, the kind that leaves invisible acid stains on skin. Then came the blonde woman's cutting remark as she swirled champagne and eyed Diana with that self-admiring air you only get when you like yourself more than anyone else. "Look at how she serves water. Almost regal. Strange. I always thought their hands were meant for protests, not porcelains." Diana took a measured step back. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, louder than usual. Inside, familiar sensations, a lump in her throat, sweat cooling down her spine, and that mother's voice whispering in her ear, "Don't react, Dee Dee. Look them in the eye, don't blink." So she did. She stood, eyes steady, facing people whose entire world, stocks, attitudes, comfort zones, was exclusively white. That's when one of the men leaned in, eyes squinted. "Excuse me, miss. Do you even understand what we're saying? Or do you need it translated, how you say street style?" It felt as though she might vanish in that moment, but she didn't. Instead, the noise vanished. The background music quieted down as though it feared what was happening. The air in the restaurant dropped, heavy and thick like cement, because right behind her came a voice that changed everything. "Excuse me, are you talking to my daughter?" Diana didn't turn around immediately. The voice was part of her childhood, her fear, her anchor. Senator Malcolm Johnson, the man who could tip federal budgets or elevate public schools with a single vote. He stood framed in the restaurant doorway like a flaw in a Tiffany display case, utterly out of place yet entirely unstoppable. People in the room froze, not out of respect, but out of fear. This was not just a politician. This was a person they did not want entangled in their scandal. "Diana," Malcolm said quietly, "are you ready to go home?" Diana removed her apron, slowly, smoothly, no theatrics, nothing dramatic like a scene in a movie. She simply slipped it off, and she walked away, one deliberate, dignified stride through the entire dining room, past stemware, plates, open mouths, everyone watching. A hush swept the place until a single whisper broke through. "That's Senator Johnson's daughter? She works here?" "Not anymore," someone from the staff murmured. Outside, the evening air was cool. Diana exhaled, a long, deliberate breath. She seemed poised to speak, but her father opened the car door before anything left her lips. Lounging behind the wheel in the quiet of the night, he looked at her and asked, "Why'd you stay?" Her voice came soft. "Because I didn't want to disappear. I didn't know how to vanish. Yet I knew that if I moved, they'd say I was ashamed or hiding." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead through windshield glare. "Because when men in this city are permitted to lob racial barbs at my daughter with a side of wit, I'm no longer senator. I'm a father." They drove through Chicago in reflective silence. Diana watched buildings blur past, watching the mirrored sadness, rage, and stubborn fire in her own eyes. But the story did not end when she removed her apron. That was merely the moment she started breathing again. The morning after everything cracked wide open, Diana Johnson woke in a room that didn't belong to her anymore. Not because it wasn't hers, but because it once was, before she left. Before she buried her pride in folded aprons and 3 a.m. shifts. Now she was back in her father's house, where the air smelled like old speeches, policy binders, and that kind of bitter coffee only a lifelong activist would brew, a taste sharpened by decades of watching the world pretend to change. The kitchen was already alive, not with conversation, but with intent. The kettle hissed like it had something to say, the skillet clanked like it was tired of frying things for justice, and at the stove stood Malcolm Johnson, a man who once grilled senators under oath and now sliced bread like it had committed a personal offense. Without looking over his shoulder, he asked, "You planning to stay silent?" Diana didn't answer right away. She pulled the sweater tighter around her, let her bare feet press against the cold kitchen tile like she needed proof the ground was still there. "No," she finally said. "I'm just trying to understand what life looks like after last night. After everyone in that place stopped seeing me as just a waitress and started whispering senator's daughter." She laughed, dry, brittle. "Wonder if they'll throw respect at me now the way they used to toss sarcasm, or maybe pepper like last time." He slid a plate across the table, followed by a chipped mug that once held campaign slogans, but now just held coffee. "You wanted silence," Malcolm said. "But in this country, a black woman doesn't get silence. She gets options, be a stage or be a target." She didn't have time to bite into the toast before a knock came at the front door. Sharp, rehearsed, and somehow self-important. Jeremy entered before anyone could say come in. He was technically her father's assistant, 3 years younger than her, with the face of a man who carried the full weight of American democracy in his briefcase. His tie was crooked, his face worse. "We need to talk," he said, already setting his tablet down on the table like a warning flare. He tapped the screen. There it was. Video. Not the full video. Not the part with the slurs or the uncomfortable laughter that oozed over her skin like bleach. No, it was the part where Senator Malcolm Johnson arrived, took his daughter by the arm, and walked her out of the restaurant. The headline? "Power Intervenes. Political Meddling in Private Business. Elitist Privilege?" Diana snorted. Of course they cut the beginning. A black woman in trouble? That's not content, that's pity. But daughter of power disrupts small business? She laughed again. That's the kind of headline that gets shared with wine and finger-pointing. Jeremy cleared his throat. That's not all. The restaurant put out a statement. They claim you violated professional conduct rules, that you used work time for personal matters. Management filed an official complaint. They're calling for an investigation. And just like that, the air in the room changed. Not sad, not heavy, but angry, alive, electric. Diana didn't freeze because of fear this time. She froze because something inside her caught fire. "They're serious?" Her voice cracked like thunder against a stained glass window. "These people, those clowns in custom suits, who laughed at me like I was a joke, they're filing a complaint. They're scared," Malcolm said quietly, finally meeting her eyes. "Because you showed them something they don't know how to handle. A voice and a name. That's a dangerous combination, especially on a black waitress." "Let them be afraid," Diana snapped, pushing away her untouched plate. "I worked for crumbs, smiled through their little digs, served them like royalty, and now I'm the threat?" The phone rang. Unknown number. She answered out of instinct. "Miss Johnson," came a voice so icy it could frost glass. "We've seen the footage. Consider this a friendly reminder. If you attempt to leverage this incident against our business, we'll pursue legal action. We have excellent attorneys. We trust you're a reasonable woman." She hung up, didn't even blink. "They're trying to scare me," she said to Malcolm, her voice flat. "Like I'm not a person, like I'm a problem to manage." He stood, not like a man leaving the room, but like a man preparing for testimony. "Then it's time we remind them. Some problems know how to use a microphone." The next day they were in the office of attorney Juliana Reyes, young, sharp, with cropped hair, and a reputation for bearing corporations who underestimated her. She didn't smile often, but when Diana spoke, she watched with the intensity of someone finally receiving the case they'd been waiting their whole career to argue. "They've got nothing," Juliana said. "No real proof, just a chopped-up video and bad PR. If you're willing to go all the way, I'll file the claim today." Diana leaned forward, fingers intertwined. "You think we'll win?" "Do I think we'll win?" Juliana smirked. "Number I think they'll regret ever assuming you'd stay quiet." 3 days later, the press got wind of the suit. Diana Johnson, daughter of Senator Malcolm Johnson, files discrimination claim against elite restaurant Maison Elise. She hadn't done a single interview yet, but one podcast host captured the sentiment perfectly. "This isn't about money. She's coming for the truth. And the truth doesn't pair well with white linen and polished forks." Social media exploded. People were furious. Half shouted, "Keep politics out of our food." Others said, "It's about time someone stood up." But the real storm came quietly, from people who'd lived it. One former employee of the restaurant, Mei Lin, posted on her personal page, "I quit after being denied promotion twice, even though my reviews were flawless. The manager told me, 'You're not the right fit for the VIP floor. Our guests expect a certain image.'" I knew exactly what he meant. In 2 days, 17 more testimonies followed. Black, Latino, Asian workers. Those who left. Those who were pushed. Some stories came with screenshots. Others with tears. Diana read each one. Saved them. Breathed deeper. And she realized this wasn't her story anymore. This was ours. The Cook County Courthouse was not built to birth revolutions. It was designed for paperwork, for routine arraignments, and tired clerks clacking away at keyboards that had seen too many broken promises. It smelled like burnt coffee, linoleum, and the quiet resignation of public defenders. But on this particular day, something different pushed against the stale air. A pulse, not a riot, not a chant, a slow, steady heartbeat, a tension you could feel behind your eyes. And at the center of it, seated in the front row of courtroom 6B, was Diana Johnson. She wore a burgundy suit, not flashy, not dramatic, but strong. Her posture upright, chin high, eyes clear. Not angry, not afraid, but anchored. She looked like someone who'd been through the fire and came back with the embers still smoldering in her spine. Across from her sat the legal team from Maison Elise. 4 men, clean-shaven like mannequins in a law firm catalog. Matching ties, matching expressions. Their skin pale, their briefcases black, their brows furrowed. Not because they were worried yet, but because something about the room felt off. Like a quiet before something that wasn't supposed to happen. Diana didn't look at them until she did. Until her eyes met Pierce Tronton's, the restaurant's manager. The man who had laughed that night, who had raised his wine glass and lowered his gaze, confident she'd stay small. Now his fingers twitched. The judge entered. A black woman in her 60s, no-nonsense glasses perched on her nose like they'd been through several wars. Her gaze scanned the room with surgical precision. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "This court is now in session. Are all parties present?" "Affirmative, Your Honor," said Juliana Ramirez, standing tall beside Diana. Her tone wasn't loud, but it had a gravity that made even the fluorescent lights pause. "We are ready." Ready. Such a small word for what was about to unfold. The courtroom felt like someone had placed a live wire beneath the floor tiles. First to speak was Maison Elise's lead counsel, a man whose voice lacked conviction. Dry, apologetic, the tone of someone used to winning by default. "Your Honor, the defense would like to remind the court that Ms. Johnson failed to adhere to the restaurant's internal policies. She abandoned her post without permission, engaged in what could be viewed as unprofessional conduct in front of patrons. We acknowledge there may have been isolated incidents of misunderstanding, but misunderstanding?" Diana's voice cracked through the room like a struck match. She hadn't meant to speak, but it happened anyway. "You're calling go back to your street a misunderstanding? You must be here by quota. Is cultural miscommunication now?" The judge banged her gavel. "Ms. Johnson, you'll have your time, but the remark is noted." The room thickened. Not with heat, but with weight. The kind of weight that lives in rooms where people finally stop pretending. Then Juliana stood. If the restaurant's lawyer was water, she was stone. Still, firm, unshaken. "Your Honor, we intend to provide evidence, video, eyewitness accounts, internal correspondence, proving that my client was subjected to repeated racial abuse. We will show that her managers responded to similar actions by white employees with leniency while punishing Ms. Johnson severely. We have documentation where she is described as not fitting the aesthetic of the VIP section." She set a folder on the table. Thick, bound tight, heavy not with paper, but with years. "And more importantly," she continued, "we will demonstrate that Maison Elise operated under a system of bias, intentional or not, that actively prevented advancement for employees of color. Because that restaurant wasn't just serving food, it was serving a version of America that we all need to examine." The judge looked at Tronton. He looked away. Outside the courtroom, chaos waited like paparazzi outside a hospital. Cameras, microphones. Questions like grenades tossed from every angle. One reporter, more eager than wise, shoved his mic inches from Diana's face. "Ms. Johnson, do you believe your background, your father's status, gives you an unfair advantage in this case?" She stopped, turned, looked directly into the lens. "My advantage?" she repeated. "My advantage is that I am no longer afraid. Even without a senator for a father, I would still speak. Because let me tell you something. There comes a point when being tired of being humiliated becomes a political force all its own." That clip hit airwaves by nightfall. News anchors debated it, bloggers quoted it, and someone, somewhere, clipped it over background music and posted it with the title, "This is not your average waitress." But the real movement happened quietly. That same night, Diana received a message from someone she didn't know. "I worked at Maison Elise in 2006. They fired me for being aggressive. I raised my voice when customers shouted at me. I was the only black server on staff. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." And then another. "I was a cook. We weren't allowed at VIP events because we didn't fit the ambiance. I've been silent for 9 years. Not anymore." By morning, the inbox was flooded. Former employees, quiet workers, people with stories they'd held in their throats for years, waiting for someone else to say it first. 2 days later, Pierce Taunton gave an interview. He sat straight, tried to look calm, hands folded like a priest at confession. "We're not racist," he said, sweat gleaming on his hairline. "We employ people from many backgrounds. But in hospitality, aesthetics matter. Presentation matters." That word, aesthetic, landed like a slap in a crowded room. The internet erupted. Thousands responded not with anger, but with images. They posted photos of mothers, grandmothers, sisters in uniforms, holding trays, smiling with grace learned through struggle. "This is your aesthetic? This is our reality." At the second hearing, Juliana brought the final blow. An anonymous leak, internal messages between Taunton and a senior executive. "If she makes noise, we have the resources to shut her down. Money, contacts, just break her, like the others." The courtroom froze, not a cough, not a blink. The judge read the message aloud, then looked at Taunton. "Are these your words?" Silence. And in that silence, a different kind of rage was born. Not the loud kind, but the enduring kind. The kind that lives in headlines, in hashtags, in policy reform. The kind that won't fade after the credits roll. This wasn't just a court case anymore. It was a mirror held up to a system that preferred quiet black workers and louder denial. And as Diana sat there, back straight, fists unclenched, she understood. She had not come to ask for a seat at the table. She had come to flip it. 3 months later, Chicago wasn't buzzing. It was roaring. The city, usually quick to move on from scandal to scandal, like a skipping stone over a lake of distractions, couldn't shake this one loose. The Diana Johnson case had become more than a courtroom saga. It was now layered like an old leather trench coat. Legal, media, moral, and yes, even cultural. People weren't just talking in barbershops and coffee houses. They were debating on panels, in union halls, and through spoken word on open mics. Not because it was juicy, but because it was familiar. This wasn't just about Diana anymore. It was about every ma'am that came with a smirk. Every smile a black woman had to paste on while swallowing rage. Every "you people" whispered under the breath of privilege. The verdict came down clear. Maison Elise was guilty of creating a discriminatory work environment and attempting to tarnish an employee's reputation on the basis of racial bias. They were ordered to pay damages and implement a full-scale cultural audit and reform program. But the money? That was dust on the surface. The real quake was underneath, where those who'd believed themselves untouchable now found their feet unsteady. When Diana heard the decision, she didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She sat exactly as she had on day one, back straight, hands on her lap. Only this time, her eyes weren't searching. They were still, and that stillness, it made people uncomfortable. Because stillness can be power, and power without apology, that rattles people more than shouting ever could. As for Pierce Taunton, fired, permanently barred from executive roles in the hospitality industry. His press release read like a limp napkin soaked in excuse. "I was taken out of context. I've been misunderstood. I'm not racist. I just had a rough childhood." Right, of course. All racists seem to have tragic backstories, but somehow their trauma always translates into policy and never into empathy. The restaurant chain went full PR rehab. "We're committed to equity," they claimed. "We're undergoing deep cultural realignment." Behind the scenes, though, staff were scrubbing servers' files. Old evaluations disappeared, and whispers snaked through smoke breaks about who was next to be cut loose. But Diana? She didn't go back to service. She didn't open a blog, write a memoir, or sell the film rights. Instead, she got an offer from a university, a respected one. They asked her to lead a new interdisciplinary course titled Social Justice and Labor Ethics in Corporate America. Her response was dry as autumn wind. "You want me to teach? Me? The one who was not suitable for the VIP section?" The dean had smiled with the patience of someone who knew exactly what they were asking for. "Precisely because you've been in that section, and you walked out whole. First day of class, room packed. Some students stood along the walls. Black, Latinx, Asian, white. They weren't there for credits. They were there for the voice, the one that didn't bend, the one that wasn't born in a microphone, but earned it. Diana walked in, dressed simple, black blazer, hair tied back, one notebook under her arm. She stepped up to the lectern and didn't clear her throat, didn't check the mic. She looked at them. If you came here thinking I'm going to tell you how to fight pretty, you should leave now. Fighting is ugly. It's humiliating. It's isolating. Most of the time, it comes without applause. But if you've ever felt silence choking you harder than fear, that's when you know it's time to speak. Then she told her story, the whole thing, not the headline, the flesh of it, the fear, the nights lying awake, rehearsing how to respond to someone's polished cruelty, the exhaustion of walking the tightrope between grace and fury. She didn't glamorize the struggle, she exposed it. Somewhere mid-lecture, someone in the back stopped breathing for a second. You could hear it, the kind of pause that only happens when truth lands in the gut. Meanwhile, back in Chicago's neighborhoods and suburbs, a different kind of heat was building. Inspired by her trial, former workers from other restaurants came forward. 18 filed lawsuits. Others began documenting incidents publicly. Managerial bias, silent quotas, and cultural aesthetic standards that conveniently favored white faces. One labor attorney called it the Johnson effect. A columnist wrote, "She didn't just defend her name. She cracked open the attic of a house everyone pretended was clean." Of course, not all responses were celebratory. Some labeled her loud, ungrateful, manipulating the family name. One op-ed in a conservative digest sniped, "If her father weren't in the Senate, no one would have listened." Diana read that. She didn't blink. She didn't clap back on social media. But in an NPR interview weeks later, she said, "Maybe that's true. Maybe the mic reached me faster because of my father. But you know what? You didn't hear him. You heard me. And if you heard me once, you'll hear others." That's the point. That's the whole point. During a class Q&A, a student raised his hand. Nervous, young, maybe 20, glasses slipping down his nose. "Professor Johnson, I was wondering, when did you stop being afraid?" She paused. Not for effect, for memory. She adjusted her earring, exhaled slowly. "I didn't stop. Fear's still there. It doesn't vanish. I just got tired of pretending fear was a good enough reason to stay quiet." And she turned back to the board. No dramatics, no echoing music cue, just the rustle of notebooks and the unspoken understanding that this woman wasn't teaching from a book. She was teaching from a wound. On the last day of the semester, the classroom emptied slowly. Students lingered, reluctant. One girl took a photo with Diana. Another just nodded and mouthed, "Thank you." And then the room was quiet. One final student approached. He looked like he'd been working up the nerve for weeks. I wanted to say, you helped me realize I'm not crazy. When things happen at my job, I always thought I was just imagining it. Now I know, and I'm going to speak up because of you." Diana didn't hug him. She didn't give a speech. She just nodded. Then it was worth it. She walked down the hallway of that university building. No cameras, no fanfare, no victory parade, just her footsteps echoing. And when she pushed the door open and stepped into the cold wind of the Chicago winter, she smiled. Not the kind you see on magazine covers, but the kind that comes from knowing you said what needed to be said. And this time, nobody laughed.